welcome to the webinar today. My name is Lad Surwat. I'm the Africa Senior Analyst for ACLED, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data. We're the leading source of data and analysis on global conflict. I'll be moderating today's session, where we'll be discussing our latest report, Rwanda in Mozambique, Limits to Civilian Protection. The report comes out at a critical time. Much of the focus on Rwanda has been on their involvement in DRC, but this ought not to come at the neglect of RDF's deployments elsewhere into places such as Mozambique. This particular report was produced in collaboration with the Cabo Delgado Conflict Observatory and expands on some of the work that we produced in September of last year on RDF operations across Africa. Cabo Delgado, or Connected Cape, is a conflict observatory that was launched in 2020 in partnership between ACLED, Zitamar News, and Media Coup to monitor political violence in Mozambique. This wouldn't be possible without the generous support of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to expand the capacity and monitoring needed for such a complex and changing context that is northern Mozambique. So Cabo Delgado supports real-time data collection on the insurgency in Cabo Delgado province and provides timely analysis of such conflict trends. So to walk us through the report today, we're joined by the author, Peter Boffin. Peter is a Southeast Africa senior analyst at ACLED, focusing on the Cabo Delgado Conflict Observatory. In this capacity, Peter is responsible for managing the production of fortnightly updates, leading collaboration with partners, engaging key stakeholders in Mozambique and elsewhere. Since 2017, Peter's led research projects, written and presented extensively on conflict in East Africa. He's also worked on the petroleum sector, governance, civil society space, political economy, to inform planning and natural resource management, civil society, and investment. We're also joined today by Miriam Umarji, who will provide a response to the presentation. Miriam is an economics and data journalist at Zitamar, specializing in economic analysis, data visualization, and financial systems. She provides data-driven insights on Mozambique's economy, contributes to the Cabo Delgado Conflict Observatory, and strengthens Zitamar's capacity to present complex financial and economic trends. She has a background in public financial management and governance. So Miriam, thank you so much for joining us today and really appreciate your contributions to Zitamar. In addition, we have Tomasz Kafas on the webinar. Tomasz is a Mozambican research consultant and academic specializing in extractive industries, conflict analysis, and community development. Currently at Zitamar and the Cabo Delgado Conflict Observatory, Tomasz works as an analyst and coordinates the work of Cabo Delgado community reporters. He will also give us some insights today during the Q&A. So as you do have questions, as they come up throughout the discussion, feel free to pop those questions into the Q&A function throughout the event, and we'll be looking at those later on. So Tomasz, thank you so much for joining us today. With that, I will pass it over to Peter to start us off.
Okay, thank you, Lad. And firstly, thanks to everybody who's helped put this this report and this webinar together. It's a lot of work, but it's a group effort. The slide that you're looking at is a simple bar chart of Rwandan forces engagement with Islamic State. It's simple, but reflects some key aspects of the changing posture of Rwandan forces over the years. It spans from their initial deployment in 2021 and is divided by month. Rwandan forces, mostly the Rwanda Defense Force, but also the Rwanda National Police, deployed to northern Mozambique in July 2021 and had quick success against the insurgency that prior to that was close to taking control of much of Cabo Delgado province. And there were some certain characteristics of their performance that are worth highlighting. Initial operations were sort of concentrated and intense, as the initial bars on the left demonstrate. This was particularly to take control of Musimba de Praia town and large insurgent bases along the Masala River to the south of the town, as well as Palma Town, the Afungi Peninsula, where the Total Energies liquefied natural gas LNG plant is located, and wider Palma district. By mid 2022, insurgents had been pushed out of their bases along the river, no longer presented a threat to any towns in the province as they had lost the mobility to mobilize any large forces, and were forced to operate in the small formations that have been characteristic of their operations up until today. The Rwandan forces achieved this with next to no civilian targeting. ACLED has only recorded two such incidents since their first deployment. It's nearly 5 years that they've been there, or nearly 4 years that they've been there. And this has contributed to excellent community relations, particularly in Musimba de Praia and Palma. Their demonstrated discipline when on patrol and on duty is also contributes to this, to the extent that civilians with a grievance against Mozambican security forces, and there are many, will often appeal to Rwandan authorities rather than to Mozambican ones when they want them addressed. And the final characteristic to note is the size of the force. Since May 2024, there's over 4,000 Rwandan troops in Cabo Delgado, making it perhaps the most important of Rwanda's overseas missions after its engagement in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Troop numbers in Cabo Delgado are almost double the number on duty in South Sudan on peacekeeping duties with the United Nations, and exceed combined Rwandan forces in the Central African Republic by approximately 1/3. In Central African Republic, Rwanda has troops in the peacekeeping mission, as well as a small deployment under a bilateral arrangement with the Central African Republic government. But today, we're going to concentrate on the right-hand side of the graph, indicating declining activity. And we'll demonstrate how a posture that is less aggressive is allowing sort of freedom of movement of insurgents, if not territorial control, and has the potential to damage excellent community relations, and there are signs of that already, with implications for counterinsurgency efforts across northern Mozambique. The next slide, please. This slide is a bit busier. So I'll just talk you through it first. It sketches out the military presence in northern Mozambique. And to orient you, the road highlighted in purple is the N380, which is the main north-south artery for commercial, humanitarian, and social traffic from the provincial capital of Pemba in the south to the town of Musimba de Praia, the port town of Musimba de Praia in the north of the province. We've marked on the map the locations of military positions that we know of. The first thing to point out is that the map is an important reminder that there are two foreign intervention forces in Mozambique now, from Rwanda and Tanzania. The Tanzania People's Defense Force operates from two locations that you can see in Nangadi district. And of course, they have a significant presence on the Rwanda side of the border. But that's a story for another day. And today our focus is on Rwandan forces. Rwanda's main bases are in Palma. There's one next door to the Total Energies LNG plant, and Musimba de Praia, with its force headquarters in Musimba de Praia town. Rwandan and FADM, being the Mozambican military outposts outside the main towns, were all established in 2022. And in 2024, with the Great Force expansion, Rwandan forces moved into a large base in Nakamia town that was established by the South African contingent of the SADC mission that withdrew last year. That is the Rwandan camp that you can see highlighted with 4 stars. That's the camp just outside Nakamia town. First thing you notice is that the positions are scattered along the M380, from Mozambique Praia town in the north to Macomia town further south. There are 7 bases or outposts, 4 being Rwandan, 3 being Mozambican. And that's not surprising, as it's an important road, but also a presence there may restrict insurgent activity from positions to the east of the road in Macomia district, an area known as Gatupa Forest, and along the Masala River, which runs across the middle of that map, where they have traditionally had a hard to access area where they've traditionally had a presence. The next slide, please. Thanks. Two visuals here. And the data on this slide it tries to helps us answer the question as to whether this presence has restricted ISM activity on the N380 between Macomia and Mozambique Praia, and whether it's contributed to civilian protection. And the answer, based on ACLED data, seems to be no. On the left, we see Islamic State Mozambique activity on that stretch of road over the years, with clashes with the Rwandan forces highlighted in red. In recent months, ISM political violence has been higher than in recent years, and despite a doubling of troop numbers overall and an increased presence on this stretch of road, we haven't seen a change in Rwandan activity that you might expect given that increase in ISM activity. The visual on the right indicates absolute levels of political violence from Islamic State Mozambique on that stretch of road again, and the proportion of it that is civilian targeting. And you can clearly see the green civilian targeting. You can clearly see the proportions increasing. But just to stress it, in 2021, 26% of ISM violence on that stretch of road was targeting civilians. It rose to 45% in 2022. Overall numbers dropped considerably, but the proportion of civilian targeting remained the same at 44%. And there was a significant increase in overall activity in 2024, and all of that increase was accounted for by civilian targeting, 65% in total. Could we have the next slide, please? It's another map, which helps us to look at, to see what this looks like on a local level. We're highlighting an area around one Rwandan base, which has 2 FADM outposts in the neighborhood. So if we look more closely at the towns and villages of Shai, Litamanda, and Miangalewa, a more robust response might have been expected given the presence of Rwandan troops at Litamanda, FADM at Shitashi and Namobo, 2 outposts, and of course a larger Rwandan base to the south in Macomia town, which is just out of shot. Since December 2024, ISM activity around Shai, Litamanda, and Miangalewa has varied, ranging from simple movements through the area to acts of looting and property destruction, as well as the abduction of civilians and indeed soldiers for ransom quite recently. But also clashes with state forces. But of all the events recorded by ACLED in this area from the 1st of December 2024 to the 31st of March this year, just 5 were clashes between ISM and state forces. South of the Masala River, 2 clashes occurred between ISM and the local force in Chai and Litandakua in February. The local force is a government-backed community militia. In March, ISM clashed twice with FADM and once with Rwandan forces, and they were all related to Islamic State Mozambique roadblocks that you might have read about recently. North of the river, ACLED records just 1 clash with state forces in this area, when Rwandan forces responded to an ISM attack in Miagalewa in December, which we understand was the day after the attack. So during this period, you could say that the local force, the government-backed community militia, which is also the worst equipped and the least skilled branch of the defense and security forces of Mozambique, has been in the front line and not necessarily their comrades of either FADM or Rwanda. This has been noticed by the local force. One commander complained in March to media in Pemba that Rwandan forces on the N380 were unwilling to engage with ISM militarily, and he also claimed that Rwandan forces often turned up hours after an attack, even when they were located nearby. And he also noted ISM sustained targeting of the N380. Now, when the officer made his comments, we had for some time been collecting information from open sources about troop positions and lining this up with ACLED data on conflict events. And we were seeing the same thing that the local force was saying, which is that the current posture of Rwandan forces may be heightening the risk of attacks on civilians by insurgents. So not so many fatalities over the 4 months, 29, but significant displacement. Actions around Cheyenne Litamanda in February alone saw over 5,000 people displaced, most moving to Macomia town. And it's important to note that displacement is a clearly articulated tactic of Islamic State in Mozambique. They have outlined this how small incidents in isolated rural areas and villages can create sort of waves of fear that lead to the displacement of thousands. They're moved to urban centres and that thereby putting a strain on urban centres. So the next and final substantive slide, please. Yeah, so that there are some implications that arise from this. Firstly, we're seeing ISM being able to maintain a presence in sort of traditional areas, but the first one being the Masala River area, also Gatuba Forest east of the N380, from where they are able to continue to launch these attacks mostly on civilian targets. There's also some evidence to suggest that much of the looting taking place in this area is actually being used to supply ISM groups who are located on the coast in Macomia. So that's worrying. There's also issues around IDPs. Miangalewa town or village north of the Masala River is, we understand at this point, just depopulated. And under current circumstances, return is unlikely. The same for the 5,000 or so who were displaced in February by attacks around Shai and Litamanda. And of course, the tens of thousands of IDPs who are still in Macomia town. I think it's over 70,000 at the last survey in June, which I think was in July last year, of IDPs in Cabo Delgado. For Rwanda, this presents some reputational risks. Probably the primary one is local. So if the force is not seen as a source of protection, as expressed by the local force commander, it may come to be seen as part of the problem and not the solution, particularly amongst communities in which it operates, or those who have been displaced from areas in which it operates, and that would be disappointing given that the high reputation it enjoys in places where it's had some more success in Palma and Mocimboa prior. And of course, the principal implication of this is that we're likely to see, by extension, we're likely to see continued conflict as continued low-level conflict for the foreseeable future, and certainly in the immediate area. Decreasing access to intelligence from local communities if the reputation, if relations with communities tend disimprove as the way they might given current circumstances. I've not gone into the causes of this deliberately. I might be happy to address or discuss that in the Q&A. but our data, of course, doesn't allow us to, doesn't help us identify the causes of what's happening, but it does allow us to describe it. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for listening, and I'd like to pass it on to Miriam Umerji of Zitamar News for a response to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, ACLED, for this invitation. On behalf of Zitamar, this opportunity to join this important discussion. We're a local newsroom committed to reporting on issues of conflict, economics, and public accountability throughout Mozambique. And we've been working with you, alongside you, on tracking these developments in Cabo Delgado since the first attacks in Mocimboa da Praia. Your report that is being launched today, it's timely and it's also incisive. What you're doing very well is move beyond the battlefield narrative. You're helping us look squarely at a troubling shift. Why is this military force, once viewed as effective and as protective, changing its posture and becoming more passive, or in some cases even absent? And this is happening while we are seeing renewed violence against civilians in this region. So there is notably need for dialogue around the causes and also around the solutions. So this raises critical questions. I'm not going to repeat the numbers and the facts you just presented us, but it is raising us important questions. Are we witnessing, in one hand, a tactical shift in the insurgent strategy? Are those actors adopting more agile style and guerrilla style operations? And are they becoming better at exploiting the gaps in the current military and security deployments, both from Mozambique and Rwanda? Or are we, in another possibility, witnessing strategic fatigue from the Rwanda that is expanding its military commitments across other regions in the continent? Or is there recalibration underway? Are we now prioritizing strategic and economic assets over civilian zones? So that is an important one. And then, are we seeing operational limits on the bilateral agreements because there's changes in the political economy and we are seeing a growing fragmented theater in that region of the country? So I have, again, a few reflections. I think your data shows clearly that being close, proximity does not equal protection. This N380 remains one of the most militarized roads in the country, but yet we're seeing the attacks on the civilians persist, often very close to the Rwandese positioning. So theoretically, they should be able to do a much rapid response to those incidents than what we actually are seeing. The Rwandese forces in the beginning were perceived as agile, as reclaiming territory and engaging visibly with the local communities. Today, however, we're seeing those engagements less frequent, delays more common, and civilians' fear rising. So there are risks with this that will impact how stabilization is going to be taken forward from the operational side there. Also, we can't look at this without looking at the changing conditions in the ground. Samim mission has withdrawn and no replacement forces have been deployed. And now RDF is expected to cover a previously shared territory that had different players and different actors securing it before. So at the same time, the insurgents appear to be adapting and relying more on decentralized, mobile, and guerrilla-style tactics that overcome the traditional security structures that are in place. So there is a growing mismatch between static military deployments and this ever-moving, nimble adversary. So what is the model to keep the promise and the posture going forward? We're also seeing the economics of this insecurity moving forward. This situation is not costing only lives, it's also costing livelihoods. So this return of violence, and especially in areas that with the roads that promote trade routes, we're seeing that Makumia and Miangalewa are being cut off trade routes. We are seeing chokes in agriculture. We are seeing also more delays in reconstruction, and we are seeing more dependency from community and displaced populations. And also humanitarian actors are not being able to circulate and act as previously. And local economies overall are collapsing further than we've seen. So the N14 roadblocks, R698, also important roadblocks there. So how are we going to address these issues? Because they are just deepening the development crisis in the region. Also, all the hopes put on the LNG project that was supposed to be our national turn point, it remains on hold. So even if it's resumed, how is this going to be addressed in terms of infrastructure, governance capacity, social contract with communities, and so on? So in addition to the promise and the posture, these economics of insecurity also matter. And then the reputation dilemma. The Mozambicans and the community in general, looking at the Rwandese military diplomacy as much wanted and needed, with coming into the conflict with much energy that was lacking, but now changing, and this might affect its leadership and credibility not just in this region, but also in other parts of the continent. So are they really that indifferent to the civilian protection issues, or what is going on beyond that behavior and that posture that we are seeing? And is this going to affect their reputation, not just in Mozambique, but elsewhere? So your report is very timely, but I think it opens the big question in the room, which is why Rwanda posture is changing. Is it a political issue? Because Mozambique is coming out of this particular election cycle, and have the parameters of working with foreign troops changed? We need to investigate that. Is it an issue of strategic overstretch, as the Rwandese are simultaneously deploying troops in different theaters in the continent? Is Mozambique or Cabo Delgado slipping down in the list of priorities? Or is there a tacit shift in mandate where communities are not at the center of their intervention, but mostly their role now is on safeguarding the infrastructure like the LNG sites? Or is there a finance agenda? Is there an effort to position Mozambique as a priority and to mobilize more resources and more financial support for their cause? Is it also an issue that there is fatigue setting in, and that there are no incentives to take risks on behalf of civilians? Or in fact is an issue that the Rwandese are actually doing their job and doing the best they can, but they are facing an evolving landscape, and the insurgency is taking shapes in unexpected or less planned ways. And there is this immense challenge of securing a very vast, fragmented territory almost by themselves. So we don't have definitive answers, but we can't just observe this happening. Inaction has a cost, and in this case is a cost of lives, is a cost of recovery, and it's also a cost of reputation. So Zitamar News welcomes this very good report with all the data that comes with it. But we did comes an urgent call on having those conversations and understanding some of the context and some of the issues so that we can identify both the security challenges, but also the political and cooperation challenges that come with it. And I would stop there, saying thank you for this opportunity once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and really appreciate your feedback on the report. Peter, thank you for the presentation. Really interesting, and I think the slides convey many of the key points that you discuss in the report, of course, in further detail. So at this point, we'll turn to the Q&A. I want to give both Peter and Miriam, as well as Tomasz, the opportunity to reply to the various questions. I'll go ahead and read a question. Each of you can reply. If you don't have a response, feel free to defer to someone else. And yeah, with that, I think we can look at our first question. Can you explain how you identified the locations of the bases shown by Peter on slide 3 of the RDF in various locations? Where's this information coming from? How reliable is it? So would, yeah, appreciate your reply to that, Peter.
Thanks, and I'm glad of the question. It's almost entirely open source, and yesterday I was just reviewing our sources, and our greatest source is the Rwandan government, and as well as one Rwandan media source. We've learned of location of most of those bases from press releases from the Rwanda's Ministry of Defense. These can then be corroborated through both Google Earth to get exact locations when they're mentioned by public sources, and you can then pretty much nail down the month of establishment through not through historical Google Earth material, because that has big gaps, but through switching to Copernicus, which is the European-backed satellite imaging project, which is updated much more regularly and allows you to identify changes sort of within a few weeks, so you can identify the establishment of a camp very quickly. We've also been able to obviously people we're in contact with in Cabo Delgado who sort of drive past these camps, and even Rwandan TV, Igihe TV, that's also been a source for the location of two of the camps in a report that they broadcast last month. Yeah, it's essentially public communications by the Rwandan government, one or two communications from the Mozambican government, a lot of open source satellite imagery, and some media work and corroboration with people on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting, and appreciate the extensive work in triangulating that. I'm sure many on the call will be very interested to see some of those locations and then conduct further analysis based on your work. Miriam or Tomasz, would you have anything further to share on the Rwandan base locations? Okay, nothing further. I think we can move on.
I should point out that there's no risk attached to sort of publishing this. If we know, the insurgents know it, and there's other camps on Macomia coast that the insurgents know about that we don't, not yet anyway. So yeah, it's open source. There's no risk attached to it.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, we had a few questions here. I see on kind of Rwanda's potential exit strategy, or do we maybe see the way things are trending that they might be interested in withdrawing? Can kind of discuss that in context with maybe their operations in DRC, elsewhere, their current political standing. So do we see this as a precursor to an exit or a winding down of their operations in Mozambique?
I would think not. Well, we've had a significant increase last year. In terms of we just don't know if there's an exit strategy or not. Any military is impenetrable, but the Rwandan military complex is particularly so. So yeah, we just don't know, and they may not even know themselves, and that's actually probably the right position to have when you're navigating a complex environment, as they are, not to have a clear exit strategy, but to continue navigating. And yeah, at some point they might decide to withdraw. I don't know. Tomasz, would you think?
Yes. In regard to the exit plan, it's important to look at the dynamics in Maputo in particular, especially with the change of the government from President Nyusi and Chapo. We thought that might be some change in terms of dynamics, but things remain relatively the same. President Chapo hasn't made big changes in the way that the conflict is going on in Cabo Delgado. There's been 2 changes, but with not much impact on the ground. We have the new interior minister, but also very recently there was a change at the military leadership. We have now a new command-in-chief. But in terms of politics between Mozambique and Rwanda or Chapo Kagame, we are not seeing any new development. So right now, I'll say that things remain the same in regard to the bilateral agreement between Mozambique and Rwanda. So we are not expecting much changes at this point, at this moment.
Just to add to what Tomasz and Peter are saying, and if those changes are being planned, they are not being communicated with the wider public in general, and there's no consultations or debate around that. When the new government took place, a few trips to Rwanda did follow, as well some meetings at the regional level, again reinforcing the partnership, but without much coming out to the public in general on if there is an exit strategy and for when, or if there is going to be a transition period and what it's going to look like as well.
Thank you all for your responses on that. I see a question I think the report and all of you on the call can answer well, and that looks specifically at the risks to civilians. In the presentation so far, you mentioned civilian targeting, but perhaps you can go further into the specific risks to civilians. What are the maybe types specifically of violence they're seeing, perhaps various attacks, or are insurgents using forms of explosives or remote violence? I think it might also be interesting to explore other further implications. Miriam, you mentioned the sort of livelihood costs of this, so you can go into that a bit further. And Tomasz, please come in if you have further to share on that point.
Yeah, the violence against civilians is that's undertaken by Islamic State Mozambique, which is the principal actor in terms of civilian targeting. It's intimate and it's brutal. It's primarily attacks on small communities or even people isolated who are working their fields. The appearance of insurgents will usually lead to people fleeing if there's anyone left. And if anyone is caught, usually 1 or 2 people, usually nearly always men, will be killed. And it's yeah, it's brutal and it's intimate. That's what we in the data sort of classed as sort of political violence, civilian targeting. Though there's also the other categories of looting and property destruction. Which, so for example, on the political violence chart that I showed you of Islamic State Mozambique, that only included sort of attacks and clashes. Didn't include the looting and property destruction, which probably has a greater impact on civilians' lives, where whole villages are pretty much can be put to the torch and destroyed, and you consequently have a huge sort of population of people who have been displaced from their homes, or tens of thousands in Macomia town alone, and many more further south, around Pemba and places like that. Yeah, so it's yeah, it's brutal and intimate.
And I think it goes without saying, or just underscores what Peter are saying, with displaced people, you have the health and education challenge that come with it, especially on those that are younger or more vulnerable, or those that are older. There is also a gender issue, especially when it comes to agriculture and informal trades that used to take place in those routes, that are now disrupted, and then with the consequences on food security and nutrition in some of those communities. We do know that insurgents do visit some of the communities because they have links or family or in those communities, and they're very selective on how they approach some of those communities. But overall, the tone is of disruption. This is in one side. The other side we're seeing is access to public services that they can't enjoy anymore. So there are that side of things as well. But maybe Thomas can support more on this.
Well, not much contribution, just to agree with you, Miriam.
Okay. Thanks for response on that, everyone. I think I'm seeing a few interesting discussion points just related to the changing politics between Mozambique and Rwanda. Is there any reason to think that the shift in Rwandan posture has come with changes locally in Mozambique, politically, with sort of the previous president Yusi being very close to Kagame, and potentially current president Chapo being not as close? Or would those differences in political relations be a driving factor behind this? Or perhaps if not, then do elaborate further on other political drivers that might be behind the change in RDF's posture.
It's there's two elements that I could look at in terms of this question. Firstly, this note that since October, we've had from October through February, we've had historically high levels of civil unrest in Mozambique in the wake of the contested, disputed October general elections and presidential election. That probably, I would be surprised if that did not lead to Rwandan forces taking a little bit of a step back while that was happening, and not wanting to be active while the country's going through a political crisis, because there are considerable risks surrounding that. So, for example, there were many unfounded rumors that Rwandan forces were being deployed in Maputo against demonstrators, for example. So them stepping back during that period would possibly that might explain some of it. In terms of the Chapo Kagame relationship, again, it's a new relationship. It was quite personal between the heads of state, the agreements that set this deployment in motion. Not entirely personal, numbers of sort of bilateral agreements underpinning it, but really sealed at that personal level between them. And yeah, Chapo's new man, and was an unexpected choice. So that probably wasn't even on Rwanda's radar screen as potential successor. But I'd leave it at that.
Just to add to what Peter is saying as well, I think this comes also with challenges that we're seeing from the beginning, the transparency challenge, because these agreements have never been made available or totally public. And these are bilateral agreements with support from different other stakeholders. Then there is this issue that we're seeing some tensions while there's a bilateral cooperation agreement there, but we're seeing economic interest from Rwanda grow in Mozambique, especially in the region, in different sectors. How do we manage those tensions? Are there conflict of interest, and where is the transparency around some of these issues? And we need to start speaking about that as well.
Well, just to add on the two contributions, I think it's also important to highlight that Cabo Delgado, I don't think it's a priority right now for President Chapo. He's been dealing with the political unrest and instability in Mozambique, also with the financial challenges that.
Still frozen for me, but hopefully he's able to come back in momentarily.
Same for us, but I think what Tomas was trying to say is that there are too many competing priorities, and there are bigger fish to fry from the government side in the wake of the very recent elections, government restructuring, 100-day government plan that is, being signaled as priority. And from last week as well, IMF program on hold, and many other competing priorities. So do they have the effort, the energy, the time, and the resources to engage meaningfully on that part of the political agenda? I think that is the point that Tomas wanted to make.
Great. Thanks for coming in there, Miriam. And Tomas, I see your video is moving again, so I think that's a good indicator. We can hear your reply on the next few questions. Yeah, just circling back, Miriam, I think in that you mentioned some of the local economic interests that Rwanda may have, the proliferation of Rwanda businesses in the area. The last question sort of pertaining more to political drivers and perhaps that affecting changing RDF posture. Perhaps we can move on to a number of questions addressing their economic interests, both on the input side, the sort of disruptions to aid globally, thinking about sort of USAID, funding cuts from the UK. Are any of those impacting Rwanda and their operations in Mozambique? Also, a few sort of related questions on the economic input side. Does Rwanda receive any funding from some of the LNG projects in the area? Is that an interest or an influence of Rwanda's activity? So I think a number of questions related to that, and would be curious to hear your reply.
Yeah, on so the wider international environment and how sort of international money flows and changes to that might be affecting Rwanda's position. I really don't know. Though having read some work recently on Rwanda's president, DRC, one thing I learned is that while there may be sort of economic drivers, that it's not necessarily always economic interests that drive the decision making. So that's sort of something to bear in mind on that issue. In terms of the relationship with the LNG plant, there is a relationship between the LNG operators and the Rwandan forces. So that's known. There's evidence for it. What that may well be a factor that would see their presence continuing. I do remember being asked once what would happen if Total Energies decided to pull out, if they weren't able to get the financing in place that they're looking for. And I think one thing we need to be aware of is that there isn't sort of a sudden pull out when something like that happens. It's a long process of selling interests in government concessions. and sales contracts, long-term sales contracts, etc., that have already been entered into. So it's a very long process. So even if that's on the horizon, that may not prompt a pullout, as there'd be likely to be somebody else coming in to take the concession. Yeah.
We might be seeing as well this as being a way of managing uncertainty, because we're seeing growing aid and all the cuts overall from the different sources. Their main source for the time being was the EU 20 million euro support that came with significant transparency and accountability conditions, and also with earmarking on how those funds could be used both here and regionally. So we might be seeing some consequences of that, and how they, it's challenging for RDF to manage some of this. While on the other side, because of global geopolitics, we're seeing this very, I think in the space of 1 week, a few weeks ago, we've seen cuts from different partners, including the EU, and that might be creating a lot of uncertainty. Should we be managing the funds to make them last longer, or can we go back to the original plan, spend those funds, but then what's happening next? The companies are supporting through security contracts to companies linked to Rwandese, but how does the global picture look like in terms of resource allocation and resource spending for security in the region, and which role which player will take if there's a reduction of those fundings in one side as compared to the other? And again, no public information or much availability in that. Tomasz?
I think we can move on.
Great. Yeah, I think there's a few questions here related to the clashes that involve the ISM insurgents. If Rwanda is not engaging in these clashes directly, are there local militias that are sort of bearing the brunt of community protection? Or is this primarily a role that the military is taking on? We kind of group that together within the slide, but perhaps you can elaborate further on those other clashes that ISM is involved with and who those are against.
Yeah, just before the call, in fact, a little bit late, I looked at the clashes between the Mozambican military, FADM, and ISM along that same stretch of road, and it was falling precipitously from 2021. It was really really pronounced. It surprised me. So while you have when President Shapo was swearing in the new Chief of General Staff, General Jani of FADM, recently, he listed a litany of weaknesses in the Mozambican military that was really quite shocking. Continued presence of ghost soldiers on the payroll who are not there. Officers and soldiers who do not get sent into combat because they have the right connections. Very poor basic sort of systems of logistics, unfit soldiers, and people in FADM selling information to the insurgents about operations. It was quite a remarkable speech. That, in fact, might be one reason for decreased engagement by the Rwandan Defense Forces, if that is if problems with the host government forces are so bad. then it does become a little bit more difficult to go out into the field, and it certainly makes it more difficult to go out shoulder to shoulder with the host government force. So that's something that we really do need to bear in mind, something I should have mentioned earlier. What was the original question? Sorry, it just reminded me of the speech.
Yes, well, just curious, if ISM isn't combating and we're not seeing as many clashes with RDF, who are the other armed groups involved?
Yeah, it's primarily civilians who take the brunt of it. In that area that we highlighted, local force have been sort of in the front line involved in more incidents over that relatively short period, but they're involved in very few overall. And they're not involved in all areas in which they don't exist in all areas in which ISM is active. Yeah, it's primarily it's FATM in the first instance, but that certainly on that stretch of road is declining, and they're usually the victim of an attack rather than initiating operations against ISM. Otherwise, civilians bear the brunt.
I see we are at the hour with that, so we should probably wrap up here. There's many more questions left in the chat. We will try to follow up via email on as many of those as possible. I see there's a number remaining related to military posturing that we didn't get to, as well as the relations in DRC affecting Rwanda's posture in Mozambique. So would look forward to having further conversations about that via email or calls in the future. So thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, the report link is in the chat. We appreciate you subscribing for future newsletters, reports, events. You can also find that subscribe link in the chat. So thank you again. Thank you to all of our panelists, and look forward to joining you at our next webinar. See you all next time.